The storm before the calm. Grace Brighton sat on the edge of her bed, her trembling hands clutching a stack of pregnancy books. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft patterns on the wooden floor. Despite the beauty of the day outside, Grace felt as though a storm was brewing inside her. The pages of the book before her blurred as her mind raced with worries about her unborn child. She flipped through chapters about fetal development, complications, and what-ifs, absorbing every detail with an almost frantic intensity. "Are you reading those books again?" Michael's gentle voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He stood at the doorway, concern etched across his handsome face. Grace looked up, her blue eyes wide and anxious. "I just want to make sure I'm doing everything right," she said, her voice shaky. "There's so much that could go wrong." Michael crossed the room and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know you're worried, sweetheart, but you're doing great. The doctor said everything looks perfect." Grace leaned into him, seeking solace in his warmth. His reassurance was a balm, but it could not fully quell the unease simmering inside her. "But what if we miss something?" she whispered. "What if there's a problem we don't know about?" Michael gently took the book from her hands and set it aside. "Grace, you're the most careful person I know. You've read every book, checked every website. Our baby is lucky to have such a devoted mom." Tears welled up in Grace's eyes, and she felt a lump forming in her throat. "I'm just so scared, Michael. I want this baby more than anything." "I know, honey. I want this baby too." Michael pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "But all this stress isn't good for you or the baby. Why don't we go for a walk? Get some fresh air?" Grace hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. The thought of venturing outside filled her with dread. But what if? "No more what ifs," Michael said firmly but kindly. "Just a short walk around the block. It'll be good for both of you." With a reluctant nod, Grace allowed him to help her to her feet. As they walked toward the door, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The once bright eyes of her youthful spirit now appeared tired and worried. She forced a small smile, desperately trying to push away the nagging fears that constantly plagued her. The moment they stepped outside, the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze seemed to lift some of the weight from Grace's shoulders. She inhaled deeply, savoring the fresh air, and allowed herself to momentarily indulge in a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their living room, Grace suddenly doubled over, clutching her abdomen. A sharp pain rippled through her, causing her to gasp. "Michael!" she cried out, her voice trembling with panic. "Grace, what is it?" Michael's voice turned from gentle concern to urgent alarm. He rushed to her side, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," she stammered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It hurts so much." Okay, Michael said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We need to get you to the hospital." He quickly helped her stand, supporting her weight as she struggled to keep herself steady. As they hurried toward the car, Grace's mind raced with dread. What if something's wrong? What if I lose the baby? The words tumbled from her lips, the fear now fully manifesting in her heart. "Don't think like that," Michael urged, his grip tightening around her. "We're going to get you the help you need. The doctors will know what to do." But as they drove through the dimly lit streets, Grace couldn't shake the gnawing sensation in her gut. What if she had ignored all the signs? What if she had pushed her worries aside for too long? The what-ifs had become monsters in her mind, lurking in the shadows of her fear. Upon arriving at the hospital, the fluorescent lights hurt Grace's eyes as she was wheeled into the emergency room. Nurses swarmed around her, their voices a flurry of urgent commands. "Get her on the monitor. We need to check her vitals." Amid the chaos, Grace caught sight of a familiar face. Dr. Whitman, the physician assigned to her care. A tall man with a warm smile, his presence had always made her feel at ease. But as he approached, a flicker of doubt raced through her. Could she trust him? She had heard whispers, insidious thoughts that clouded her judgment. "Grace, I'm here to help you," Dr. Whitman said, his voice steady and calm. "We're going to figure this out." "Michael, I don't want him," Grace suddenly blurted out, her heart racing. The panic overwhelmed her rationality. "I don't want a black doctor. I want someone else." Silence fell in the room as the words hung heavily in the air. Dr. Whitman's expression shifted, a mix of hurt and professionalism crossing his features. Michael's face hardened, a flash of anger flickering in his eyes. "Grace, this isn't the time for this," he said, his voice low but firm. "He's the best doctor we can get right now. I don't care. I don't want him touching me," Grace shouted, her voice filled with desperation and prejudice. Dr. Whitman maintained his composure, but the pain in his eyes was palpable. "Grace, I understand your concerns, but I assure you that I will do everything I can to ensure the safety of both you and your baby. My team and I are here to help." The fear that had consumed Grace now morphed into something darker. It was a mix of shame and anger, a refusal to see beyond the color of his skin. In her mind, she had constructed barriers built on years of societal prejudice, barriers she had thought she had buried deep within her. As the medical team continued their work, Grace felt the gravity of her situation weighing down on her. What would it take for her to let go of her biases when her very life, and that of her unborn child, hung in the balance? The sharp pain intensified, and panic surged within her again. "Michael, please. I can't do this. I need someone else." But as Michael's hands clasped hers, she felt the warmth of his love, his unwavering support. "Grace, you need to trust him," he said softly. "This is about you and our baby. Please." Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as she wrestled with her emotions. Would her prejudice cost her the very thing she longed for? Would she be willing to put aside her fears to allow this man to help save her and her baby? With each painful contraction, she realized that the only thing stronger than her prejudice was her love for her child. In that moment, as she lay vulnerable on the hospital bed, she faced a crossroads: continue to cling to her biases or surrender to the truth that her child's life depended on the skills of the very person she doubted. Little did she know, Dr. Whitman's compassion and expertise would challenge not only her fears, but also the very foundation of her prejudices, leading her on a path of transformation that she could never have anticipated. And as the storm raged within her, Grace would have to confront her beliefs, face her demons, and learn that true strength often lies in the willingness to embrace the unknown. The choice. The beeping machines filled the sterile air, the urgency palpable as Grace lay on the hospital bed, her breaths quickening with each wave of pain. The bright lights above her felt blinding, and the voices around her became a distant murmur as she wrestled with the chaos in her mind. Dr. Whitman stood at the foot of the bed, his presence both calming and unsettling, forcing her to confront the very prejudice she had tried to ignore. "Grace, I need you to focus on me," Dr. Whitman said, his voice steady, cutting through the fog of fear. "Can you do that?" She wanted to respond, but a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, causing her to gasp. The sensation was visceral, a stark reminder of the life within her, a life she desperately wanted to protect. Yet the battle between her instinct to fight and her instinct to survive raged on. "Michael," she whimpered, reaching for her husband's hand, as if it were a lifeline. He rushed to her side, his eyes filled with determination. "You have to help me. I don't want him to." "Grace, please," Michael interrupted, his voice firm yet filled with compassion. "You can't let this prejudice cloud your judgment now. This is about our baby." In that moment, the reality of her situation struck her hard. She was lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by professionals dedicated to ensuring the health of both her and her unborn child. Yet her mind was fixated on the color of Dr. Whitman's skin, an irrational fear born from societal conditioning that seemed to drown out the very reason she was there. "Dr. Whitman," she began, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can trust you." He took a step closer, his expression unwavering. "Trust is built through understanding. Let me explain my experience. I've been a practicing obstetrician for over a decade, and I've seen countless cases like yours. I'm here to ensure the safety of both you and your baby." As he spoke, Grace felt a swell of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to cling to her prejudices, to justify her fears, while another part began to acknowledge the absurdity of it all. Here was a man standing before her, ready to help, yet she was allowing her biases to put her child's life in jeopardy. "Please, Grace," Michael urged again, his voice breaking through her turmoil. "Think about our baby. What would you do if it were someone else in your shoes?" Grace closed her eyes tightly, battling the onslaught of emotions. The pain surged again, sharper this time, a reminder that the clock was ticking, and every moment spent in hesitation could mean a step closer to losing everything she had fought for. "Okay," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Okay, I'll let you help me." "Thank you," Dr. Whitman replied, relief washing over his face. "Now let's get started. I need to monitor you closely to determine the best course of action." As the medical team sprang into action, Grace's mind raced. She felt exposed, vulnerable, not just because of the physical pain, but also due to the emotional turmoil that had come to a head. Her identity as a mother was now intertwined with her ability to confront her prejudices and fears. Each contraction felt like an earthquake, reverberating through her body, and forcing her to confront deeper fears than just her immediate discomfort. As the pain intensified, she was reminded of the societal expectations that had shaped her beliefs. Prejudice was like a virus, spreading insidiously, taking root in her mind and heart. But now, as she lay on that bed, the stakes had never been higher. "Grace, I need you to breathe with me," Dr. Whitman instructed, positioning himself beside her. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the tempest swirling within her. "Inhale, hold, exhale slowly. You can do this." With each breath she took, she felt the tension start to ebb away, though it did not erase the doubts that lingered. Yet, for the first time, she began to realize that her biases were her own burden to carry, and they had no place in the room where her child's life was at stake. "Michael," she whispered between breaths, "what if I've been wrong all along? What if my fears have been based on nothing but ignorance?" "Then let this be your moment of clarity," he replied, his eyes unwavering. "You're strong, Grace. You've always been strong. Now let's focus on what really matters." As the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, Grace found herself searching Dr. Whitman's face for a glimpse of something that could justify her fears. Instead, what she found was a dedicated professional, one who had devoted his life to caring for others. Each time their eyes met, she saw not just a doctor, but a man passionate about his work, a man who had earned the right to be there, regardless of the color of his skin. "Grace," Dr. Whitman said, breaking her reverie, "I need you to push when the next contraction hits. Are you ready?" Her heart raced as another wave of pain washed over her. She felt herself teetering on the edge of fear and determination. She had been given a choice, not just to allow Dr. Whitman to help her, but also to confront the ugliness within herself. "Okay," she breathed, nodding with newfound resolve. "I'm ready." As the contraction hit, Grace focused on the small life growing inside her, the innocent child who knew nothing of the world's prejudices. She drew strength from that thought, summoning every ounce of willpower she possessed. "Push," Dr. Whitman commanded, his voice strong and encouraging. With Michael's hand in hers, she pushed with all her might, feeling the pain transform into something powerful. The fear that had once consumed her began to fade away, replaced by a fierce determination. This was not just about her. It was about the future of her child and the legacy she wanted to create. "Keep going, Grace. You're doing amazing." Michael cheered, his voice a beacon of support. With each push, Grace felt the weight of her prejudices lift, as if she were shedding a skin that had suffocated her for too long. It was as if she were not just birthing a child, but also transforming herself, releasing the anger and ignorance that had haunted her. And then, in that moment of raw intensity, a cry pierced the air, a beautiful, healthy sound that filled the room with hope. Grace collapsed back against the bed, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny being cradled in Dr. Whitman's arms. "Congratulations, you have a baby girl," he announced, his voice filled with pride. The realization washed over Grace like a wave, leaving her breathless. In that moment, the prejudices she had clung to were nothing but shadows of the past. She had fought for her child's life, and in doing so, she had also fought for her own freedom from ignorance. As Dr. Whitman gently handed her daughter to her, Grace's heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of love. She gazed into the tiny face, cherishing every detail. The delicate fingers, the soft cheeks, the innocent gaze. "Hello, my beautiful girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world." The moment marked a turning point not just for Grace, but for the generations to come. She realized that her daughter would grow up in a world where acceptance, compassion, and understanding would be values she could instill. No longer would Grace allow fear and prejudice to dictate her life. As she cradled her baby in her arms, Grace made a silent vow to embrace the diversity of the world, to challenge the narratives that had shaped her fears, and to raise her daughter in an environment filled with love, respect, and understanding. This was a new beginning, not just for her child, but for herself. The journey of motherhood would lead her down a path of growth, transformation, and ultimately, healing. And as the shadows of prejudice faded into the background, Grace felt the warmth of a new dawn rising on the horizon, one filled with promise and hope. A new dawn. In the aftermath of her daughter's birth, the world outside the hospital felt both foreign and familiar to Grace. As she left the sterile walls of the maternity ward, cradling her baby in her arms, the sunlight seemed brighter, and the air felt charged with potential. Each breath she took was imbued with newfound purpose, and she was acutely aware of the life she now held in her hands, a life that would be shaped not just by her and Michael, but also by the values they chose to impart. The first few weeks at home were a whirlwind of activity. Grace found herself in a delightful yet exhausting routine, juggling the demands of a newborn and her own healing process. The exhaustion was profound, but so was the joy. Every coo, every sleepy smile from her daughter filled her with an overwhelming sense of love and responsibility. "Look at her, Grace," Michael said one evening as they sat in the soft glow of the living room, the baby peacefully sleeping in Grace's arms. "She's perfect." "Yes, she is," Grace replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But she's also so fragile. I want to protect her from everything, especially the world's prejudices." "Let's focus on what we can control," Michael encouraged, his hand gently squeezing hers. "We can give her the tools to face whatever comes her way. We can teach her to stand strong against ignorance." That was a promise Grace took to heart. She wanted to raise her daughter, whom they named Maya, to be a compassionate and courageous individual. As the days turned into weeks, she began to think of ways to instill these values. One sunny afternoon, as she was pushing Maya in her stroller through the neighborhood park, Grace felt an overwhelming urge to connect with others. The park was alive with families, children laughing, parents chatting, and a community buzzing with life. It struck her that this was the perfect environment to begin fostering the values she held dear. "Hey there," a cheerful voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. Grace looked up to see a woman jogging toward her, her own daughter, an energetic toddler with wild curls, by her side. "Is this your little one? She's adorable." Grace smiled, her heart warming at the unexpected friendliness. "Thank you. Yes, her name is Maya. She's just a few weeks old." "I'm Emma," the woman said, extending her hand. "This is my daughter, Zoe. We live just down the block." As they talked, Grace felt a sense of kinship blossoming. They shared stories about sleepless nights and the challenges of motherhood, and before she knew it, Grace was opening up about her own journey. "I've had to confront some tough truths since Maya was born," she admitted, her voice steady but vulnerable. "I realized how my biases have shaped my views, and I want to ensure she grows up with an open heart." Emma nodded, her expression understanding. "That's so important. I think we all have to navigate our own experiences and biases. It's part of being human. But what matters is the awareness you have now." Grace felt a rush of gratitude for the connection they were forming. Here was another mother, facing her own struggles and triumphs, yet ready to share the journey. In that moment, Grace understood that her daughter's future wouldn't be solely about shielding her from prejudice. It would also involve preparing her to engage with the world in a meaningful way. In the weeks that followed, Grace and Emma became fast friends. They began to meet regularly, exchanging ideas about parenting, community involvement, and their hopes for their children. Their conversations often turned to the importance of diversity and acceptance, each recognizing the power of their friendship as an example for their daughters. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench watching their children play, Emma spoke up. "You know, Grace, we should consider organizing a community gathering, something that brings families together, promotes inclusivity, and celebrates our differences. What do you think?" The idea struck a chord with Grace. "That sounds amazing. A chance for families to connect and learn from each other. We could invite everyone, different cultures, backgrounds. It could be a wonderful experience for Maya and Zoe." With that seed of an idea planted, they began to brainstorm. They envisioned a community picnic, an afternoon filled with food, games, and activities designed to encourage families to interact and share their stories. It would be a celebration of unity and diversity, an opportunity to highlight the beauty in differences. Over the next few weeks, they poured their energy into planning. They created flyers, reached out to local businesses for sponsorship, and enlisted the help of other parents in the neighborhood. As word spread, excitement began to build. They even secured a local park for the event, complete with picnic tables and a playground. On the day of the gathering, Grace felt a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. She and Emma arrived early to set up, stringing colorful banners across the trees and laying out blankets for families to relax on. As they prepared, Grace couldn't help but notice the diversity of people arriving. Families from various backgrounds, ethnicities, and walks of life. "Look at this, Grace," Emma said, beaming. "It's beautiful to see so many people coming together." "Yes, it is," Grace replied, feeling a deep sense of pride swell within her. "This is what I wanted for Maya, a chance to grow up in a world where everyone is accepted and celebrated." As the event unfolded, laughter and conversation filled the air. Families played games, children chased each other in the grass, and the smell of grilled food wafted through the park. It was a tapestry of life, vibrant and full of energy. Grace took a moment to step back and absorb the scene. She spotted Maya, nestled in a stroller, a curious expression on her face as she watched the world around her. In that moment, Grace realized that she was not just giving her daughter a lesson in acceptance, but also showing her the importance of community. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the park, Grace stood on a small makeshift stage to address the gathering. She felt a rush of nerves but reminded herself of the mission behind this gathering. The chance to inspire change, even in the smallest of ways. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "When I became a mother, I realized that it's not just my duty to protect my child, but also to shape the world she will grow up in. Each of us has a role to play in fostering understanding and acceptance. Let's celebrate our differences, learn from each other, and build a community where love conquers fear." Applause erupted around her, and Grace felt a warmth in her heart that confirmed the significance of the moment. This wasn't just about one event. It was a step toward a larger movement, an awakening for both herself and her daughter. As the evening wore on and families mingled, Grace caught sight of Dr. Whitman, who had come to the picnic with his wife and young daughter. She felt an instant sense of gratitude wash over her. He had not only provided her with the care she needed in her moment of vulnerability, but had also opened her eyes to the limitations of her own prejudices. "Dr. Whitman," she called out, making her way through the crowd. He turned, a smile spreading across his face. "Grace, it's wonderful to see you here," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for inviting us. I wanted you to be part of this," she replied, her voice sincere. "You taught me a valuable lesson, one that I hope to pass on to Maya. Thank you for everything." Dr. Whitman's expression softened, and he nodded. "It's an honor to be part of this community. I believe in creating spaces where we can learn from one another, where we can dismantle the barriers that keep us apart. Today is a beautiful step in that direction." As they stood together, sharing a moment of connection, Grace realized the profound impact this gathering would have on not just her family but the entire community. It was a celebration of humanity, an acknowledgement of shared experiences, and an affirmation that love and acceptance could triumph over prejudice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, Grace felt a surge of hope for her daughter's future. With every story shared, every friendship forged, they were weaving a tapestry of acceptance that would ripple out into the world. And as she looked down at Maya, who was blissfully unaware of the significance of the day, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would be the mother who instilled compassion, strength, and understanding in her child. She would be the change she wished to see, not just for Maya, but for everyone. And in doing so, she knew she was breaking the cycle of prejudice that had once threatened to dictate her life. This was only the beginning of their journey, a journey filled with love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that a better world was possible. As the laughter and chatter of the community filled the air, Grace stood tall, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing she had the strength of her family, her community, and the lessons of the past guiding her forward. Facing the storm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the quiet neighborhood, Grace felt a sense of peace. The community gathering had been a resounding success, and she was still riding the high of shared laughter and new friendships. Yet the moment of tranquility was about to be interrupted, as her phone rang, cutting through the comforting silence of the kitchen. "Grace, it's Emma," came the urgent voice on the other end. Grace could hear the tremor in her friend's tone, a stark contrast to the joyful sounds of children playing outside. "What's wrong?" Grace asked, her heart racing. "It's about the community event," Emma said, her voice tightening with distress. "There's been backlash. Some people are posting negative comments online, claiming we're promoting ideas that undermine traditional values." The weight of Emma's words settled heavily in the pit of Grace's stomach. "What do you mean? Who is saying this?" "Just a few voices, but they're loud. They're spreading misinformation about what the gathering was supposed to represent. They're saying we're pushing an agenda, trying to change the community's values," Emma explained, her frustration evident. "I think we need to address it before it escalates." Grace took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "We can't let a few people undermine all the good we accomplished. Our message was clear: acceptance, love, community. It's disheartening to see it twisted like this." "I know, but we have to respond," Emma urged. "We can't stay silent. If we don't stand up for what we believe in, it will only get worse." As she hung up, Grace's mind swirled with a tumult of emotions. She felt anger rise within her, not just at the individuals who had decided to spew hate, but at the realization that their work was far from done. Prejudice, she now understood, could rear its ugly head in unexpected ways, even in the most seemingly progressive spaces. "Michael," she called out, her voice tinged with urgency as she walked into the living room, where he was settling down with a book. "We need to talk. It's about the community gathering." Michael looked up, sensing the gravity of the situation in her tone. "What's happened?" Grace relayed the news about the negative comments and the backlash. Michael's brow furrowed in concern. "This is disheartening, but we knew there would be challenges. It's part of standing up for what's right." Emma thinks we need to respond publicly," Grace continued, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. "But I'm not sure how." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "We need to gather our thoughts first. Let's take a step back and evaluate what we want to say. It's important we don't react impulsively. We want to inspire, not inflame." The two of them spent the next few hours crafting a message that articulated their vision for the community. Grace poured her heart into the words, seeking to communicate not just their intentions, but also the values that had inspired the gathering in the first place. When they finally felt satisfied with the message, they decided to post it on the neighborhood forum, where the negative comments had started to spread. Grace hit send, her heart racing, as she watched the message appear on the screen. "Now, we wait," she said, her voice shaky with uncertainty. "I hope people see it for what it is." The next few days felt like an emotional roller coaster. Each time Grace checked the forum, her heart would leap and then plummet with each new comment. Some responses were supportive, affirming the need for unity and acceptance. Others were harsh, fueled by ignorance and fear. "Why are you promoting such divisive ideas?" One comment read, "We don't need to change our values just to make everyone feel included." Grace felt a wave of sadness wash over her. These were the same sentiments that had nearly held her captive in her own prejudices. She could empathize with the fear driving these words. Change was uncomfortable, and for some, it felt like a threat. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Maya cooing happily in her playpen nearby, Michael turned to Grace. "I think we need to do more than just respond online. We need to engage with these voices directly. Maybe a town hall meeting where people can express their concerns, and we can discuss this face to face." Grace nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "That could work. If we can provide a safe space for dialogue, we might be able to change some hearts and minds. After all, these aren't just faceless commenters. They're our neighbors." Over the next week, they organized a community meeting. Grace and Michael worked tirelessly to spread the word, reaching out to neighbors and friends, inviting them to share their thoughts and concerns in a respectful environment. The night of the meeting, Grace felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as she stood before a crowd of familiar faces gathered in the community center. The room was filled with an air of tension, but also an undercurrent of hope. "Thank you all for coming," Grace began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've seen a lot of discussion online lately, and we felt it was important to come together to address the concerns and aspirations that affect us all." The audience was a mix of support and skepticism. Some nodded in agreement, while others crossed their arms, their expressions uncertain. Grace could feel the weight of their gazes, a reminder of the responsibility she had undertaken. "Change is hard," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've learned that over the past few months. When I became a mother, I realized how important it is to create a world where my child can thrive, where love, acceptance, and understanding are the norms, not the exceptions." One woman raised her hand, her expression serious. "But what about our values? Aren't we losing something by trying to include everyone?" Grace felt the gravity of the question and took a deep breath. "I believe that our values can coexist with inclusion. Embracing diversity doesn't mean abandoning what we hold dear. It means enriching our community by welcoming different perspectives." Another man spoke up, "But how do we ensure that this doesn't lead to division? Some of us feel like we're being pushed out of the conversation." Michael stepped in, his voice calm and reassuring. "That's why we're here tonight. We want to listen to your concerns, understand where you're coming from, and work together to find common ground. This isn't about us versus them. It's about all of us." The dialogue continued, weaving through various perspectives, some hopeful, others skeptical. Grace felt a mix of emotions as people shared their fears and frustrations, but what struck her was the power of the conversation itself. For the first time, neighbors were discussing their beliefs openly, and in that vulnerability, there was a chance for connection. As the meeting progressed, Grace found herself speaking from the heart. sharing her own journey with prejudice and how it had shaped her understanding of the world. She spoke about her experience with Dr. Whitman, how he had challenged her biases at a time when she felt most vulnerable. That moment in the hospital taught me a profound lesson about trust and acceptance, Grace shared. It made me realize that our preconceived notions can limit us, and when we allow those notions to dictate our relationships, we risk losing so much. Gradually, the atmosphere in the room shifted. People began to listen, not just to respond but to understand. Grace could see the wheels turning in their minds, the slow unraveling of deep-seated fears and misconceptions. By the end of the night, as the meeting wrapped up, Grace felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. The conversation had been raw, real, and at times uncomfortable, but it had also been constructive. They hadn't solved everything, but they had opened a door to dialogue, a door that had been long shut. As people began to leave, a few approached Grace, expressing gratitude for her courage in speaking out. One older gentleman, his face lined with years of wisdom, stopped to shake her hand. "Thank you for bringing us together. It's easy to hide behind a screen and throw stones, but sitting here face to face, we can see that we all want the same thing: what's best for our families." Grace's heart swelled at his words. That's the truth. We may not agree on everything, but we all share a desire for love and acceptance. It's about finding a way to coexist. As she and Michael packed up the remaining materials from the meeting, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had taken a significant step forward, but she knew there was much work to be done. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was one she was willing to navigate, for Maya, and for the community she now felt deeply connected to. Later that night, as she tucked Maya into bed, Grace gazed down at her sleeping daughter, her heart full of hope. "You're growing up in a world where acceptance will be your foundation, my love," she whispered. "I promise to fight for you, to teach you the beauty of diversity, and to help you become the compassionate person I know you can be." In that moment, she realized that motherhood was more than just nurturing. It was about breaking cycles and forging new paths. Grace was determined to raise Maya in a world where understanding triumphed over prejudice and where love was the guiding force in every relationship. With each passing day, she knew she would continue to face challenges, but she was ready to confront them head-on, armed with the knowledge that change began within. And as she turned off the nursery light, leaving the door ajar, she felt a wave of peace settle over her, a peace that whispered of hope and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Navigating the waters of change. As the weeks progressed, Grace felt the pulse of her community changing. The Bridging the Gap discussions had ignited a spark that spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Each meeting unveiled new layers of vulnerability and connection, but Grace understood that deeper challenges lay ahead. While many were eager to engage and embrace a narrative of inclusivity, a significant portion of the community remained entrenched in their long-held beliefs. Grace recalled her first experiences with Dr. Whitman, the Black doctor whose kindness had opened her eyes to her own prejudices. She felt a responsibility to ensure that others could experience similar transformations. The road to acceptance was fraught with resistance, yet Grace was determined to lead the way. One evening, after a particularly emotional discussion centered on personal biases, Grace found herself reflecting on her experiences with racism and privilege. She knew that she had grown, but she also recognized that growth was not linear. People were not simply on one side of the fence or the other. They often occupied a complex middle ground, struggling with conflicting emotions and beliefs. To further engage the community, Grace and Michael decided to invite guest speakers to their sessions. They reached out to local leaders, activists, and educators who could share their experiences and knowledge about diversity and inclusion. Grace envisioned these speakers as catalysts for broader conversations, helping to address the fears and misconceptions that lingered in the air. One evening, they welcomed a local historian, Dr. Ramirez, to share insights about the history of their town, a tapestry woven with both achievements and painful legacies. Grace was excited yet anxious, knowing that history could evoke powerful emotions. As the night unfolded, Dr. Ramirez began with a captivating overview of the town's founding and the myriad cultures that had contributed to its identity. He spoke of the vibrant communities that had flourished in the area and the contributions of individuals from diverse backgrounds, emphasizing how they had enriched the community's social fabric. Every culture brings something unique to the table, Dr. Ramirez explained. The beauty of our town lies in our differences, but those differences are often accompanied by a history of misunderstanding and conflict. It's crucial for us to confront that history openly if we wish to create a more inclusive future. The audience listened intently as Dr. Ramirez recounted stories of those who had fought against discrimination and prejudice. He highlighted moments of unity, where individuals from different backgrounds had come together to support one another, forming alliances that transcended racial and cultural boundaries. As he concluded, Grace felt a surge of determination. "Thank you, Dr. Ramirez. Your insights remind us that the work we're doing is vital. We're not just aiming to change hearts and minds today, we're building a legacy for the future generations of our community." After the presentation, the room buzzed with conversation. Grace noticed a mix of enthusiasm and discomfort among attendees. A few individuals expressed gratitude for the opportunity to learn, while others appeared skeptical, crossing their arms and engaging in whispered conversations. In the following weeks, the discussions became increasingly dynamic, reflecting the diverse perspectives within the room. During one session, a local business owner, Thomas, shared his own journey of understanding. "I grew up in a household where certain biases were ingrained in me. It wasn't until I met my wife, who comes from a different background, that I started to question what I had always accepted as truth," he admitted, his voice filled with sincerity. Thomas's story resonated deeply with others in the room. Many shared their own experiences, recounting moments when they had faced uncomfortable truths about their beliefs and values. Grace could feel the energy shift, a palpable sense of shared vulnerability, an acknowledgement that growth often came from discomfort. However, not all participants were willing to engage with the discomfort. One night, as the group began to discuss implicit biases, a man named Gary, who had voiced his skepticism in previous meetings, spoke up. "I just don't understand why we need to focus on this. Aren't we making a bigger deal out of it than necessary?" Grace paused, recognizing the opportunity to address his concerns directly. "Gary, it's understandable to feel that way. Change can feel overwhelming. But these discussions help us understand our own biases, whether we acknowledge them or not. It's not about assigning blame. It's about fostering awareness." "You say that, but it feels like we're being pushed to feel guilty for things we didn't do," Gary retorted, his voice rising with frustration. In that moment, the room fell silent, tension hanging thick in the air. Grace took a deep breath, ready to navigate this sensitive territory. "I hear your frustration, and it's valid. No one here is trying to make anyone feel guilty. We're simply trying to understand how our actions and beliefs impact others. Recognizing our privileges doesn't erase our struggles. It adds depth to our understanding of our community." After a tense pause, another voice chimed in, a woman named Clara who had been nodding along with Grace. "I think it's important to remember that we're not here to attack anyone. We're here to grow together. It's about listening to each other's stories, understanding the experiences that shape our views." Gradually, the tension in the room began to dissipate as others joined in, supporting Grace and Clara's perspective. The conversation shifted, allowing Gary to express his frustrations, while also encouraging him to listen to the experiences of others. By the end of the session, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had witnessed how the dialogues, while sometimes uncomfortable, had the power to transform relationships. Each meeting chipped away at the barriers that had separated people, allowing them to see one another not as adversaries, but as neighbors striving for understanding. As the months wore on, Grace found herself taking on a more active role within the community. She became a bridge, connecting individuals from different backgrounds and encouraging them to share their stories. Inspired by her interactions with Dr. Whitman, Grace recognized the importance of fostering empathy in a world that often felt divided. However, resistance continued to linger. Negative comments still circulated on social media, and a small group of residents began organizing protests against the discussions, arguing that they were politically correct nonsense. One evening, after hearing about the protests, Grace sat in her living room, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. "What do we do?" she asked Michael, her voice barely a whisper. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We stand firm. This is part of the journey. People will push back against change, but it's our responsibility to keep the dialogue going." Determined to counteract the negativity, Grace and Michael planned a community celebration, a family day event that would bring everyone together in a spirit of unity. They envisioned a day filled with food, music, and activities that showcased the diverse cultures in their neighborhood. As they began planning, Grace felt a renewed sense of hope. If we can create a space where everyone can come together, celebrate our differences, and find common ground, it could help shift the narrative, she said to Michael, her eyes alight with excitement. The day of the event arrived, and the community center was transformed into a vibrant celebration of cultures. Colorful banners adorned the walls, and tables overflowed with dishes from around the world. Dishes lovingly prepared by residents eager to share their culinary traditions. Music filled the air, blending rhythms that invited everyone to dance together, regardless of their backgrounds. Families gathered in the courtyard, children running and playing as laughter echoed through the space. Grace watched as her neighbors, many of whom had previously held opposing views, mingled and shared stories, united by the shared experience of joy. "Look at this," Michael said, gesturing to the crowd. "This is what community looks like. It's beautiful." Grace felt a wave of warmth spread through her heart. The event had not only brought people together, it had allowed them to celebrate their differences while recognizing their shared humanity. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Grace took a moment to reflect. She had seen the power of community firsthand, the way vulnerability could foster connection, and how embracing diversity could lead to understanding. Later that evening, as the celebration wrapped up, Grace stood on a makeshift stage to thank everyone for attending. "Thank you all for being here today, for coming together as a community. We may have our differences, but it's our shared commitment to understanding one another that will make our neighborhood stronger." Applause erupted from the crowd, and Grace felt tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. This was just the beginning. She understood that they had forged connections, but the work of dismantling prejudice and fostering inclusion was ongoing. In the following weeks, the momentum from Family Day carried through the community. More residents began attending the Bridging the Gap sessions, and the conversations shifted toward actionable steps they could take to support one another. They began forming committees focused on outreach, education, and advocacy, allowing community members to take ownership of the change they wanted to see. Grace felt invigorated as she engaged with others passionate about creating an inclusive environment. The sense of unity among neighbors deepened, and Grace realized that they were building something enduring, an alliance rooted in empathy and respect. Yet, as they pushed forward, Grace also learned the importance of patience. Change would not happen overnight, and the path would undoubtedly be fraught with setbacks. There would still be moments of doubt and fear, but the collective resolve of the community was stronger than any single voice of opposition. One evening, after a particularly uplifting session, Grace gathered with Michael and Maya on the couch, feeling a wave of contentment wash over her. "We're making a real difference," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I can see the change in people. They're starting to listen to one another." Michael smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You've created a space where people can be vulnerable. It's inspiring." Grace glanced down at Maya, who was curled up on her lap, her little fingers clutching a stuffed animal. "I want her to grow up in a world where kindness prevails over fear," she said softly. "A world where differences are celebrated, not shunned." As the days turned into weeks, Grace embraced her role as a community advocate. She continued to lead discussions, organize events, and encourage her neighbors to share their stories. Each gathering felt like a step toward creating a legacy of understanding and acceptance. However, she was also mindful of her own growth. Grace recognized that she needed to confront her own biases continually, to stay open to learning and unlearning. The journey of understanding was ongoing, and she was committed to being a part of that journey. And so, as the community navigated the waters of change, Grace felt a sense of belonging, purpose, and hope. Together, they were building a future rooted in love, empathy, and connection. A future where every voice mattered, and every story had the power to inspire. In the quiet moments of reflection, as she watched Maya play and listened to the sounds of laughter echoing through her home, Grace knew they were creating something meaningful, something that would resonate for generations to come. The work ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it together, armed with the knowledge that understanding is a journey worth taking, one conversation at a time. The legacy of empathy. As the seasons changed, the community's spirit flourished, evolving into a vibrant tapestry of stories, struggles, and shared hopes. Grace felt invigorated, yet she knew this journey was just beginning. After months of deep conversations and collective action, the Bridging the Gap initiative had transformed from a small gathering into a pivotal force for change. More and more residents were stepping up to share their experiences, and the camaraderie among diverse groups was palpable. However, not everything was perfect. Tensions still simmered beneath the surface. Grace was acutely aware that while progress was being made, the threads of division still held sway over some community members. Detractors of the initiative continued to voice their opposition, some even going so far as to disrupt the meetings. Yet, in the face of this resistance, Grace remained undeterred. One particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Grace and Michael gathered with a small group of leaders from the community to discuss their plans for the upcoming Unity Festival. This festival would showcase the diverse cultures within their neighborhood through food, art, and performances, an opportunity to celebrate the community's richness and shared humanity. "We need to ensure everyone feels included," Grace emphasized during the meeting. "This festival is about celebrating our differences, but we also want to create a space where everyone feels safe and respected." Michael nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What about security? With the protests against us, we might need to have a plan in place to address any potential disruptions." "Absolutely," Grace replied. "We can work with local law enforcement to ensure that the event runs smoothly and that people feel safe. But we also need to encourage dialogue. Perhaps we can set up a booth where attendees can express their concerns or ask questions about our initiatives. This might help bridge some gaps." As they brainstormed ideas, Grace felt a swell of gratitude for the community leaders who had rallied around her. Together, they represented a microcosm of what could be achieved when individuals from various backgrounds came together with a common purpose. Their determination fueled Grace's passion and commitment to fostering inclusivity. Over the following weeks, excitement built for the Unity Festival. The community buzzed with anticipation, and word spread like wildfire. Local businesses began to contribute, offering food, decorations, and even sponsorship for various activities. The event was shaping up to be a significant celebration. As the festival approached, Grace dedicated herself to every detail, making sure no voice went unheard. She reached out to community members, encouraging them to showcase their cultures through storytelling, performances, and art. She hoped this would allow everyone to express their identity and foster understanding among neighbors. However, doubts crept in as the date drew near. Would the community rally around the festival? Would it truly bring about the unity they desired, or would it further expose the divisions that still existed? In her moments of anxiety, Grace found solace in her conversations with Dr. Whitman. He had become a friend and ally through this journey, offering wisdom and support when she felt overwhelmed. "Grace, remember that this is about progress, not perfection. It's a step forward, and that matters," he reassured her during a late-night phone call. "Thank you, Dr. Whitman," she replied, feeling the weight on her shoulders ease slightly. "It's just so important to me that we do this right." "You are doing it right. You're creating a space for people to connect. That's the first step. Everything else will follow." With his encouragement echoing in her mind, Grace pressed on. She mobilized volunteers, coordinated logistics, and kept her eye on the prize, a festival that embodied hope and connection. Finally, the day of the Unity Festival arrived, and the air buzzed with excitement. As Grace stepped out of her home, she took a deep breath, savoring the warm breeze and the sweet scent of blooming flowers. The sun shone brightly, illuminating the streets adorned with colorful banners celebrating the different cultures represented in their community. At the festival site, the atmosphere was electric. Families were setting up booths, showcasing everything from traditional foods to crafts that represented their heritage. Laughter and music filled the air as children played, running through a maze of colorful stalls. Grace felt a rush of adrenaline as she stepped onto the stage to open the festival. She glanced at the crowd, a mix of familiar faces and newcomers, all gathered with open hearts and minds. "Welcome to the Unity Festival," she called, her voice ringing with enthusiasm. "Today, we come together to celebrate our diverse backgrounds and the beauty of our shared humanity. Let's embrace the differences that make us unique and find strength in our unity." As she spoke, she noticed a small group standing off to the side, arms crossed, faces filled with skepticism. They were the same individuals who had protested against the Bridging the Gap initiative. Her heart raced for a moment, but she pushed the fear aside. This festival was a celebration, and it needed to be a safe space for everyone. After the opening remarks, the festival unfolded beautifully. Local musicians performed, showcasing various genres from different cultures, and attendees danced together, laughter mingling with the melodies. Grace saw community members engaging in conversations, sharing food, and enjoying each other's company. The barriers that had once separated them were beginning to dissolve. In one corner, a woman named Amina shared stories about her African heritage, captivating a small crowd with her vibrant storytelling. Nearby, a group of children from different backgrounds collaborated on a mural, each adding their unique touch, symbolizing the unity that Grace had envisioned. As the day progressed, Grace was filled with joy watching the community embrace the festival's spirit. But as she moved through the crowd, she caught sight of the protesting group again, still standing apart, their faces hard and unyielding. "Michael," she said, her voice low, "we need to reach out to them. I don't want them to feel excluded." "Are you sure?" he asked, concern etching his features. "They've been vocal about their opposition." Grace nodded, resolute. "Yes, they deserve to be heard too. Maybe if we open a dialogue, we can find some common ground." With a deep breath, Grace approached the group. "Hi there. I'm Grace. I know you've expressed concerns about the initiatives we've been working on. I'd love to hear your thoughts." The leader of the group, a man named Rob, stepped forward, skepticism etched across his brow. "This festival feels like an attempt to shove diversity down our throats. We're not all on board with this." "I understand that," Grace replied calmly. "This festival is meant to celebrate everyone. I believe it's essential to hear all voices, even those that disagree with us. Can we talk about your concerns?" For a moment, Rob looked taken aback. "You really want to listen?" "Absolutely. Your perspective matters, and I want to understand where you're coming from. This isn't about fighting. It's about finding a way to coexist." After a moment of silence, Rob sighed, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Okay, I'll talk. But I'm not promising to change my mind." "That's okay," Grace said, smiling gently. "Let's just share our views. We can learn from each other." As Grace engaged Rob and the others in conversation, she felt a sense of relief. The discussion was honest but respectful, with both sides willing to express their views. Grace shared her journey, her realization about her own biases, and the importance of understanding one another. Rob countered with his perspective on the perceived threat to their community's values, voicing his concerns about political correctness overshadowing genuine connections. Grace listened intently, validating his feelings and offering her own experiences as a mother who wanted her child to grow up in a world where kindness triumphed over fear. After some back-and-forth dialogue, Grace noticed a softening in Rob's stance. "I still don't agree with everything you're doing," he admitted, "but I appreciate that you're willing to hear me out." "That doesn't happen much anymore." "That's the key," Grace replied. "We can disagree but still find ways to respect and understand one another. It's about building bridges instead of walls." As their conversation concluded, Grace felt a glimmer of hope. While they may not have reached a complete agreement, there had been a shift, a willingness to listen, to engage in dialogue rather than dismiss one another. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the festival, Grace felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She returned to the festivities, where families continued to dance, share stories, and embrace one another. Michael found her and smiled. "How did it go?" "I think it was productive. They may still have reservations, but we talked. We listened. That's what matters," he said, wrapping an arm around her. "You're making a difference, Grace, one conversation at a time." The festival concluded with a breathtaking performance by a local dance troupe, blending traditional and contemporary styles that captivated the audience. Grace watched as people from different backgrounds came together on the dance floor, their movements a beautiful representation of the unity they were striving for. As the night wore on, Grace reflected on the incredible journey they had embarked on as a community. Change was not linear, and it required patience, empathy, and perseverance. The festival had not only showcased their diverse cultures, but had also ignited a flame of understanding that would continue to burn brightly. In the weeks following the Unity Festival, Grace continued her advocacy work with renewed vigor. The discussions around inclusivity became more nuanced, diving deeper into topics of privilege, equity, and the importance of allyship. More residents began to express their willingness to engage, and the conversations flourished. Even Rob and his group, while still skeptical, found themselves participating in some discussions. Grace would often see them sitting at the edge of the room, listening intently, and occasionally engaging. It was a small step, but every little bit counted. As the months rolled by, Grace's vision for the community evolved. She realized that her role was not just about leading discussions, but also about being a facilitator of connections. She began collaborating with local organizations, schools, and businesses to promote initiatives that fostered understanding and support for marginalized groups. One evening, as she sat in her living room with Michael and Maya, Grace reflected on how far they had come. Maya giggled as she played with her toys, her laughter a sound of pure joy. "Do you think we're making a real difference, Michael?" Grace asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Michael turned to her, his expression earnest. "Absolutely. You've opened doors for so many people, Grace. Change takes time, but you're planting seeds of understanding that will blossom for years to come." His words resonated deeply within her, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. With every event, every conversation, and every connection made, they were creating a legacy of empathy, one that Maya and future generations would carry forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over their neighborhood, Grace felt hopeful. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but they were not facing them alone. Together, they were fostering a community where kindness prevailed, and every voice mattered. In her heart, she carried the belief that understanding is a journey worth taking, one conversation at a time, one connection at a time. And with that, Grace smiled, embracing the future that lay ahead, ready to continue the work of building bridges, igniting empathy, and creating a world where love triumphed over fear.